Single dad Caleb Morris never imagined that a simple Thursday night dinner with his daughter would end with 3 men on the floor of Maple Street Diner and a billionaire at his table the next morning. But the moment Lily whispered, "Daddy, please help her," everything changed. Thursday evenings in Ashford Heights belonged to routine, and Caleb protected routine the way some men protected treasure. The 6:15 p.m. shift change at the construction site. The drive through familiar streets lined with aging brick storefronts. The same cracked vinyl booth near the window at Maple Street Diner, where neon light flickered red against the glass and the scent of fried onions clung to the air like a memory that refused to fade. Lily would slide in first, backpack tucked beside her, ponytail slightly crooked from a long day at school, and Caleb would follow, broad-shouldered, quiet, the kind of man whose presence filled space without demanding attention. A former Army staff sergeant who now wore work boots dusted with drywall instead of combat sand, his hands rough from years of lifting beams and steady from years of carrying responsibility alone. The waitress, Donna, would bring Lily a chocolate milk without asking and set down Caleb's black coffee with a nod that said more than words ever needed to, because everyone in that diner knew Caleb Morris as the widower who never missed a school recital. The father who double-checked homework at the counter. The man who fixed Mrs. Talley's porch steps for free after her hip surgery. Nothing about that night suggested it would be different. Not the low hum of the ceiling fan. Not the couple arguing softly over pie near the register. Not the retired mechanic reading a newspaper 2 stools down. And certainly not the woman seated alone in the back corner booth. Navy coat buttoned high. Dark hair pulled back neatly. Posture composed but guarded. The kind of woman who seemed used to observing a room before entering it fully. She had arrived 15 minutes earlier, ordered tea, declined dessert, and kept her phone face down on the table as though silence were a deliberate choice rather than an accident. Caleb noticed her only in passing the way he noticed exits and reflections and hands that moved too quickly. Old habits from a life he rarely spoke about. But he returned his attention to Lily, who was explaining with great seriousness how her class hamster had escaped and caused a level 3 classroom emergency, complete with construction paper barricades and a heroic rescue involving a lunchbox. Caleb listened the way he always did, fully, nodding at the right moments, asking questions that made her feel like the story mattered, because to him it did. At 6:42 p.m., the front door opened harder than necessary, the bell above it clanging against the glass with sharp insistence. And 3 men stepped inside, carrying with them the sour tang of alcohol and the restless energy of people looking for something to disturb. They were in their late 20s, jackets unzipped despite the chill, laughter too loud for the size of the room, eyes scanning not for menus but for reactions. Donna's smile faltered for half a second before she masked it with professional politeness, asking if they wanted a table. But they didn't wait to be seated, choosing instead the booth directly beside the woman in the navy coat. Caleb felt the shift before he fully saw it, the subtle tightening in the room, the way conversations lowered half a notch, the mechanic folding his newspaper without turning the page. The first comment from the man was disguised as a joke, something about lonely dinners, followed by snickers that stretched too long, and the woman responded with a measured, "I'm fine, thank you," her voice calm but firm. Lily kept talking about the hamster, unaware at first, and Caleb let his gaze drift casually toward the back without turning his head completely, assessing posture, spacing, intent. The second man slid closer in the booth than courtesy allowed, elbow resting along the back of her seat, invading space that wasn't his, and when she shifted away he mirrored the movement, closing the gap. Donna hesitated behind the counter, glancing toward Caleb briefly. Not as a call for rescue, but as a silent acknowledgement that she saw what he saw. Caleb remained seated, not out of indifference but out of discipline, because stepping in too early could escalate what might still dissolve on its own. Then the third man stood and positioned himself partly in the aisle, creating a barrier between the woman and the rest of the diner, a subtle maneuver that transformed discomfort into confinement. Lily's voice trailed off mid-sentence. She followed Caleb's line of sight now, small fingers tightening around her straw. The woman attempted to gather her purse, signaling an intention to leave, and that was when the first man reached out and took hold of her wrist, not violently at first, but possessively, as if her autonomy were negotiable. the sound of the ceramic teacup rattling against its saucer was louder than the laughter that followed. "Relax," the man said, grinning. "We're just talking." And Caleb felt something cold settle beneath his ribs, the kind of clarity that comes not from anger but from decision. Lily tugged at his flannel sleeve, her voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow carrying across the space between childhood and consequence. "Daddy, please help her." Caleb placed his coffee cup down carefully, aligning it with the edge of the napkin as though precision mattered in moments like these, because control begins with the smallest movements. He looked at Lily first, not at the man, and in that look was a lesson he had taught her 100 times in quieter ways. That courage is not loud, that strength is not cruel, that protecting someone does not require permission when harm is unfolding. He rose from the booth slowly. Every chair leg scraped against the tile, echoing more than usual, and the diner seemed to inhale. Collectively, Caleb did not rush, did not posture, did not announce himself. He simply walked toward the back corner where 3 men had mistaken a quiet woman for easy entertainment and a small-town diner for a stage. The neon light flickered again in the window, casting brief red shadows across the floor, and as he approached, the first man tightened his grip slightly, emboldened by his friend's proximity. Caleb stopped an arm's length away, voice even, unshaken, the same tone he once used to issue commands that kept people alive. "Let go of her." The 3 men would later tell police it happened too fast to understand, but everyone inside Maple Street Diner knew it. Began the second Caleb Morris said, "Let go of her," and the man holding the woman's wrist laughed instead of listening. The laughter was thin, forced, designed for an audience, and it echoed off the chrome napkin holders and the pie display near the counter, as if bravado could substitute for judgment. The woman in the navy coat tried once more to pull her hand free, her composure cracking just slightly at the edges, and the man's fingers tightened in response, not enough to bruise yet, but enough to declare ownership over a stranger's space. Caleb didn't raise his voice, didn't square up like someone looking for a fight. He simply stepped closer, positioning his body between the aisle and the booth so the third man could no longer block the exit. And that subtle shift, barely noticeable to anyone without training, changed the geometry of the confrontation. "We're just talking, old man." The second man sneered, pushing himself up from the seat, chest puffed, breath thick with whiskey. Caleb's eyes never left the first man's hand on the woman's wrist. "You're done talking," he said calmly, and in that calm was something the men misread as weakness. The first shove came from the second man, a clumsy, 2-handed push to Caleb's shoulder meant to provoke and perform at the same time. But Caleb absorbed it without stumbling, feet adjusting instinctively on the black and white tile floor, balance rooted like poured concrete. Lily watched from booth 7, small hands gripping the edge of the table. Donna frozen behind the counter with the phone already halfway to her ear. The first man made his mistake then. He yanked the woman's arm as if to drag her upright, perhaps to use her as leverage, perhaps simply because ego demanded escalation, and Caleb moved. There was no dramatic wind-up, no shouted warning, just a swift rotation of his torso and a controlled grip on the man's wrist, thumb pressing into a nerve point while his other hand anchored the elbow. The motion was economical, practiced, and within a breath the man was bent forward over the table, face inches from his untouched plate, pain replacing laughter as his knees buckled. Dishes clattered to the floor, ceramic shattering against tile like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence no one wanted to finish. The second man swung wildly, a looping punch telegraphed by anger more than skill, and Caleb ducked beneath it, stepping inside the arc, driving his shoulder into the man's midsection with enough force to empty his lungs, but not enough to break bone. They collided with the edge of the jukebox, coins rattling inside. As the machine flickered to life with half a verse of an old country song before cutting out again, the third man, who had been blocking the aisle, lunged from behind, arms reaching for Caleb's neck in a desperate attempt to overwhelm him through numbers. But Caleb pivoted, releasing the first man, who crumpled to the floor clutching his wrist, and hooking his foot behind the third man's ankle while guiding his momentum forward. Gravity did the rest. The man hit the tile hard, air rushing from his chest in a shocked grunt as the back of his head narrowly missed the base of a counter stool. The entire exchange lasted less than 20 seconds, though to Lily it felt like a suspended lifetime measured in heartbeats. Caleb stepped back immediately, hands open at his sides, breathing steady, eyes scanning not for victory, but for threat assessment. Were they reaching for weapons? Were they getting up? Was anyone else in danger? The second man tried to rise, anger overriding pain, but one sharp look from Caleb, calculated, unblinking, made him reconsider, and he stayed down, clutching his ribs and cursing under his breath. The woman had retreated from the booth, standing now a few feet behind Caleb, her composure returning in layers, shock first, then relief, then something else. Recognition of the kind of intervention that comes without hesitation yet without cruelty. Donna's voice shook as she spoke into the phone, giving the dispatcher the diner's address, describing a disturbance, 3 men down, no visible weapons. The retired mechanic had already begun shepherding Lily closer to the counter for safety. Though her eyes never left her father, Caleb didn't pursue the man, didn't add a single unnecessary strike, because this was never about punishment, only about stopping harm. Stay down. He instructed evenly, the tone of command still intact from years that had shaped it. And whether it was the authority in his voice or the pain radiating through their limbs, the men obeyed. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens cut through the night air of Ashford Heights, red and blue lights reflecting against the diner windows in fractured streaks. Officers entered cautiously, hands near their belts, taking in the overturned chairs, the broken dishes, the 3 groaning men on the floor, and the single father standing calmly a few steps away. Who started it? One officer asked, and before anyone else could speak, the woman in the navy coat stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering now. They did. He stopped it. Donna confirmed it. As did the mechanic, as did 2 teenagers who had recorded the entire incident on their phones from the far booth. The security cameras mounted in the corners blinked silently, having captured every second from the first wrist grab to the final fall. The officers separated the men, cuffing them one by one as protests turned into slurred justifications. He attacked us. We were joking. She overreacted. But the footage would tell a different story. One officer approached Caleb, assessing him for injuries. You hurt? He asked. Caleb shook his head once. No, sir. The officer nodded, glancing at the woman. Ma'am? She flexed her wrist gently. I'll have a bruise, she admitted. But I'm all right. Lily broke free from the mechanic's gentle hold and ran the short distance to her father, wrapping her arms around his waist as tightly as she could. Caleb rested a hand on the back of her head, eyes softening for the first time since he'd stood up. It's okay, he murmured to her, though he wasn't entirely sure whether he meant for her or for himself. As the men were escorted outside in handcuffs, one of them spat a final threat over his shoulder, promising revenge in the hollow way cowards often do when consequences arrive. But Caleb didn't respond. He had learned long ago that real strength doesn't chase the last word. The patrol cars pulled away with sirens silent this time, leaving behind a diner slowly returning to breath and motion. Chairs were set upright, broken plates swept into dustpans, murmurs rising into full conversations again. Donna approached Caleb with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. Caleb glanced toward the woman, who was speaking quietly with an officer while giving her statement. Yeah, he replied, voice low. I did. The neon light in the window buzzed once more, steady now. And as Caleb guided Lily back toward booth 7, unaware that security footage was already being shared beyond the walls of Maple Street Diner, unaware that by morning his name would reach someone far more powerful than the 3 men he had just taken down. He believed the night's story was over, but it had only just begun. By sunrise, the footage from Maple Street Diner had traveled far beyond Ashford Heights, and by 9 the next morning 3 black SUVs rolled into the cracked asphalt parking lot, drawing more attention than the flashing police lights had the night before, because it wasn't sirens stepping out this time, it was power. Caleb Morris was already inside with Lily, seated at booth 7 like always, steam rising from his coffee, her backpack resting against the vinyl seat as she finished a blueberry pancake before school. The diner buzzed louder than usual, phones lighting up with notifications, whispers bouncing from counter to kitchen about the video that had racked up hundreds of thousands of views overnight. Single dad takes down 3 men in diner. And Caleb, who didn't own social media and barely checked the news, remained unaware that his quiet intervention had become public spectacle. Donna approached their booth twice that morning for no reason other than nervous energy, refilling coffee that didn't need refilling, glancing toward the door each time the bell chimed. When it finally opened at 9:07 a.m., conversation died mid-sentence. 2 men in tailored charcoal suits stepped in first, scanning the room with professional precision, not threatening but alert, the kind of alert that suggested their presence was preventative rather than reactive. Behind them entered a tall man in his early 40s, impeccably dressed yet understated, silver at his temples, posture relaxed in a way only people accustomed to control can afford. Several patrons recognized him instantly from magazine covers and business headlines. Adrian Vale, technology investor, real estate mogul, billionaire founder of Vale Dynamics. And the temperature of the room seemed to shift without the thermostat moving an inch. He wasn't alone. A few steps behind him walked the woman from the night before. Navy coat exchanged for a tailored cream blazer, wrist faintly bruised but chin lifted, composure fully restored. Lily noticed first. "Daddy," she whispered, eyes wide. "That's the lady." Caleb turned slowly, instinctively rising to his feet again, not out of intimidation, but habit. Adrian approached booth 7 with measured steps, extending his hand before speaking. "Mr. Morris," he asked, voice smooth but sincere. Caleb nodded once and shook his hand, grip firm, assessing. "Yes, sir." Adrian glanced at Lily and softened. "You must be Lily," she nodded shyly. "I'm Adrian Vale," he continued, and though he did not add titles, no one in the diner needed clarification. Caleb gestured toward the seat across from him. "Have a seat." Adrian slid into the booth without hesitation, dismissing his security detail with a subtle motion that kept them near the entrance but out of earshot. The woman took the seat beside him. "My sister, Sophia," Adrian said. Sophia met Caleb's eyes directly. "I didn't get the chance to thank you properly last night." Caleb shifted slightly. "You don't owe me thanks." Sophia's expression held steady. "I do. Those men have been involved in harassment complaints in 2 other cities. I prefer not to travel with visible security. I underestimated them." Lily looked between the adults. "Daddy said we help when it's right," she offered proudly. Sophia's smile carried both warmth and something like admiration. "Then your father did exactly what was right." Adrian folded his hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. "I watched the footage," he said plainly. "Every angle. You used controlled force. No escalation. No ego. You neutralized 3 threats in under half a minute and stepped back." Caleb didn't respond to the analysis. "They were hurting her," he said simply. Adrian studied him for a moment as if measuring something beyond physical capability. "Men like that rely on no one stepping in," Adrian replied. "Last night, you stepped in." Donna hovered nearby, pretending to wipe down an already clean counter, and half the diner strayed. To hear without appearing obvious, Adrian reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and removed a thick envelope, placing it on the table between them. Caleb didn't touch it. "If that's money," he said evenly, "I'm not interested." Adrian shook his head. "It's not a check." Sophia slid the envelope closer. "It's a proposal." Caleb hesitated, then opened it. Inside were documents, typed and detailed. Plans for a community-funded self-defense and mentorship center in Ashford Heights, full. Operational backing from the Vale Foundation, veteran employment preference, youth training programs, after-school safety workshops. Caleb looked up slowly. Adrian continued. "We fund initiatives in cities where preventable violence becomes normalized. What I saw last night wasn't just skill. It was leadership under pressure. Discipline. Restraint. That's rare." Caleb exhaled quietly. "I'm a construction foreman." "You're also a former staff sergeant," Adrian replied, having clearly done his research. 2 tours overseas. Honorable discharge. Bronze Star citation for pulling 2 men out of a compromised vehicle. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. He didn't enjoy strangers reciting his history. Sophia spoke gently. "My foundation invests in people who act without cameras asking them to. You didn't know anyone was recording. You acted because a little girl asked you to help." Lily sat taller at that. Caleb glanced at her, then back at the documents. "You want me to run this?" he asked. "Lead it," Adrian corrected. "We provide funding. Infrastructure, legal framework. You provide direction, training, standards. The diner had grown so quiet that even the sizzle from the kitchen seemed distant. Caleb stared at the plans, floor layouts, budget projections, timelines. He imagined a space where teenagers learned awareness before arrogance, where single mothers could attend weekend self-defense classes without cost, where veterans found purpose beyond memory. He also imagined paperwork, responsibility, public attention, things he had spent years avoiding. "Why here?" he asked. Adrian's answer came, without pause. "Because this is where you stood up." Silence settled over the booth. Lily reached across the table and touched the edge of the envelope. "Daddy," she said softly, "you always say we build things that last." The simplicity of it landed harder than any statistic. Caleb looked around Maple Street Diner. The scuffed floors, the familiar faces, the place where nothing extraordinary was supposed to happen. Then he looked at Sophia's faint bruise and remembered the grip on her wrist. The laughter, the assumption that no one would interfere. He closed the folder carefully. "I won't be your headline," he said. Adrian nodded once. "Good. And it won't be about me." Sophia smiled. "Even better." Caleb extended his hand across the table. "I'll review everything. If it's done right, we'll talk." Adrian shook his hand firmly. "That's all I'm asking." Outside, the black SUVs waited, engines idling quietly. Inside, the diner slowly exhaled as conversation returned in cautious waves. As Adrian and Sophia stood to leave, Sophia paused beside Lily. "Thank you for saying something," she told her sincerely. Lily grinned. "He always listens." When the door closed behind them and the SUVs pulled away, Caleb sat back down at booth 7, envelope resting beside his. "Coffee?" Donna approached wide-eyed. "You realize who that was, right?" she whispered. Caleb looked at Lily, who was finishing the last bite of her pancake as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "Yeah," he said calmly, sliding the envelope into his work jacket. "But this booth's still ours." And for the first time since the night before, the wait in the room felt less like aftermath and more like beginning.